Hello everyone. A very warm welcome to my thesis presentation. My thesis is titled Two Essays on Persuasion in B2C Interpersonal Selling. So across the thesis, I'll be looking at persuasion in an interpersonal selling, which is basically a customer and salesperson diet, and how does it interplay. So my thesis covers two essays, essay 1 and essay 2. Essay 1 is essentially literature review, which has two studies, study 1 and study 2. Study 1 is basically a meta-analysis and study 2 is a morphological analysis. And then comes essay 2, which is essentially an experimental study. Out of the research question derived from the essay 1, I take one particular research question and I try to explore it in my essay 2. Uh, I'll start by saying that persuasion in selling is not simply about saying a yes or getting a yes. It works best when the conversation feels clear, useful, and trustworthy. In that context, I'll also briefly explain as to what the real world problem is and why consumers often rely on a salesperson, especially when the product is complex. So, for example, in mutual fund, insurance, and similar services, and quality is hard to judge. So, customers often cannot verify what is the right choice for them to buy, and the decision feels very risky on a personal level. So, in mutual fund context, for example, or in investment, people worry about loss or regret. Or in, for example, let's say in electric vehicle, people worry about faulty product. So in these moments, salesperson come into picture and they do more than just presenting options. They shape how customer interpret information, trust recommendation, and decide whether to continue the relationship or not. So the quality of conversation also matters, apart from what is being said or done. And why this matters? Because customer feel informed and supported rather than confused or pressurized. For the salesperson, it matters because the communication affects trust, credibility, and whether customers return to them or not. And for the firms, obviously, it matters because sales quality shapes complaint, reputation, revenue, retention, and long-term relationship. Uh, and the practice literature I'll briefly explain also sort of covers the same uh, problem. It highlights the same problem. There are four articles which HBR, MIT, Bain, and Accenture, which highlight the fact that persuasion is not about selling is just not about persuasion or pitching. It is much more than that. Um, the savior and more skeptical customers reward transparency and so on and so forth. Now, this brings me to my essays. As if there are two essays, which five studies, two studies in one and three studies in essay two in experimental, and one central question: when does persuasion help and when does it backfire? So, essay one covers the literature review, as I mentioned. So, it says, what does the prior research review say overall? So, as I said, I do meta analysis, which covers the entire empirical landscape of the prior research and the morphological mapping of the literature as to understand what has been done and what has not been done, what are the research opportunities present. And then I come back to essay 2, wherein I take a particular example of salesperson using jargon in interaction and then understand how does it relate to clarity, usefulness, expertise, and future interaction. So overall, the thesis moved from a big picture of literature to a concrete communication choice. So I'll discuss briefly on my essay 1. Essay 1 essentially starts with meta-analysis, which is my first study. So in the entire sample size, I had 78 papers, which was followed through a Prisma guideline. And then subsequently, I came down to 42 papers for meta-analysis. So 42 papers is a quantitative paper subset, which forms a meta-analytical sample. And 78 is the morphological sample, which is the entire sample for my study. In meta-analysis, I take about 35,251 participants across 13 countries. The main result of the meta-analysis was that the persuasion is positive effect, but it is modest. So persuasion can work, but not in the uniform or automatic way. And thus the meta-analysis gives us a benchmark that persuasion helps on average, but the average hides larger differences across situations. And hence we can infer that there is no one size that fit all tactics. That comes to my morphological analysis. Here, what I do is I do a morphological analysis of the literature. I break down the literature to dimensions, subdimension, and variants, and then I cross-fit each variant with each other. And the findings were basically that customers scrutinize the message, they put mental effort, they also infer selling intentions, and they also look for customer and salesperson message fit. So through my VIM matrix, which is variance intersection matrix, I came across 44 unexplored combinations of studies, which which could serve as a future research agenda for the studies. And it also highlights the fact that some persuasive tactic might help in one setting, while other might backfire. Now, what is common in essay one, essay thesis one, that is study one and essay two, and what is the divergence in the study is what we look at here. So as I said, in study one meta-analysis, it shows that effects vary substantially across contexts. There is no one size fit all playbook. More reliable, stronger messages. Effect with outcomes involve behavioral response, evaluation, judgment, cognitive outcomes, and coping defensive responses. So practically, what managers could do is match persuasion strategy to the focal outcome rather than relying on generic relational warmth. As far as morphological study is concerned, relational and organizational drivers are missing in the overall study. So I'll just make it clear. So if you see relational and organizational drivers are narrower in converge and often understudied or often studied indirectly. So that is one future research agenda from the morphological analysis. And outcome coverage is skewed towards attitudinal and behavioral outcomes. So relational outcomes and organizational outcomes are not explored. So these could be further explored in literature. Therefore, the VIM, that is various intersection matrix, highlights 44 high value research gaps, which can be looked upon in the future studies by the researchers. All in all, the common ground that the both study point out is that persuasion is an attribution process. Buyers infer motive sincerity and quality from cues. Cognitive pathway and vigilance and coping design are central to persuasion. Relational element matter, but they are contingent, hence they should be explored further. So what SA1 essentially does, it benchmarks and boundary condition. The morphological analysis shares a taxonomy of the field. The variance intersection matrix allows a visual inference map and a theory building agent. Now that brings me to my essay 2, which is the jargon question. So what I do here is I observe whether in advisory selling, does sounding more technical actually help, or it acts as a loss for the salesperson. And sales conversation or selling conversation are usually language conversations. Salesperson often use jargon in order to sound professional or signal some sort of expertise to the customer. In many categories, such as financial services, customers already feel they have a lot to learn. So they look forward to the salesperson to help them understand the information. The research question is when and how does salesperson jargon shape the customer interaction to interact with salesperson again? And does the salience of salesperson credibility change this? Now, the key intuition here was listeners rapidly appraise who is speaking and then interpret what was said. So, source judgment may precede message judgment. I did an experiment. I did 3 studies across the participants in between subject design. The main independent variable was jargon. So, what the experiment found was when more jargon was used, information felt less useful. That is, information diagnosticity reused, and that lead to salesperson being perceived as less expert because they were not able to make the customers understand, and hence due to that expertise lower impression or perception, the willingness to interact against the salesperson also decreased. But we also took credibility cue as a moderator in the second mediator DV relationship, and that showed that if credibility cues are provided, the expertise to willingness to interact again relationship is softened. So complexity is not a problem by itself. The problem arises when the explanation stops being helpful and helps in hampers decision making. So what is new and why it matters? It brings the literature. The essay brings scattered evidence together through meta and morphological analysis. We use 3 kind of evidences: meta-analysis, literature mapping, and experiments. And we shaped relationship continuity as an main attention. This is just not asked did the customer agree, but also would they want to interact again. So hence the practical takeaway would be interest sensitive markets. Clarity should come before sophistication. With that, I thank you everyone for listening to my presentation. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my RAC members with RAC Chairperson Professor Sridhar Guda, my area member Professor Aishwarya Ramsundaram, and my cross area member Professor Payal Anand. I will also like to thank my TC Chairperson Professor Vidushi Pandey. Thank you everyone.